Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, where I've been practicing law for 26 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often write about this stuff for places at roadandtrack.com, and I've written a few books as well, including the new Lemon Law Bible. It came out a couple years ago, and it's everything the smart consumer needs to know about automobile law. If you want a copy, I'll hook you up. $6, postage paid anywhere in the U.S., and I'll even sign it for you. I'm practically giving them away. So what we'll talk about today was in the book, as well as a lot of other stuff, how the lemon law works and so on. But today's topic, and this is important, it's a common misconception regarding the law, but no, federal law does not allow you to roll an odometer back in a car just because it's 10 years old. Okay? A lot of people believe this to be true, and Joe, a viewer of this show, sent me a note and said, Steve, it's kind of funny because you're talking about odometer fraud and so on in your podcasts, and then there's the suggested videos that YouTube puts up on the side, and they put up a video that the headline suggests that there's this loophole that lets you roll odometers back on vehicles that are over 10 years old. And I've encountered this before. And it's kind of funny because it shows you what happens when people who don't know the law get on the internet and look at a law, very, very specifically a section of the law, and don't understand how to put it in context. And in law school, we call that statutory construction, the understanding of how statutes are constructed, literally, or how we make laws and how you interpret laws. And statutory construction problems occur in many, many places. I've met many people who are confused about the Constitution because they can find one little piece that they like and don't understand that the full context means something else. So what we're talking about today is an article, and the one that Joe pointed out to me was an article put out by some TV station down south, I guess Memphis, Tennessee, which I guess is considered mid-south. And the headline on the article where they posted the video says, federal exemption allows auto dealers to roll back odometers. Federal exemption allows auto dealers to roll back odometers. Now, that's not true. Simply not true. And my first thought was, wow, I can't believe a news station got this story so radically wrong. But, well, I guess that shouldn't be that big of a surprise. But it turns out if you read the article or watch the video, they don't say that. In other words, somebody was simply writing a headline, clickbait, and they decided to make it as interesting as possible. So they just said, hey, there's this federal exemption that allows them to roll back odometers. And it's absolutely not true. There is no federal exemption that allows anyone to roll back an odometer. You cannot roll back an odometer in America without breaking the law. Now, I've had people say, Steve, but there's a section of a statute that says you're allowed to. And I always say, okay, show me the section of the statute that allows you to do that. And they point to something that doesn't say what they want it to. So first of all, let's talk about this. In most parts of the country, there are two sets of laws that address odometer tampering, rollbacks, disconnections, and so on. And what we're getting at here is the law doesn't just say that you cannot roll back an odometer, because there's other things people used to do. People used to disconnect the odometer, drive the car for a couple years, reconnect the odometer. In the old days of mechanical odometers, you could do that and it wouldn't hurt anything except the odometer, and you're breaking a federal law. So nowadays, of course, you know that the odometer reading on your dashboard is probably digital, and it's connected to a box under the hood someplace, and it's calculating the stuff using a computer, and if you disconnect that, the engine might not run right, I don't know, but the point is, it's a little more complicated than it used to be. But it can still be done. So they had to specify a bunch of things you could not do that would affect the mileage on the dashboard being correct. So the federal statute, I'm going to read to you the section that says, a person may not, 1, advertise for sale, sell, use, install, or have installed a device that makes an odometer of a motor vehicle register a mileage different from the mileage the vehicle is driven. So in other words, this is going at the devices people used to install. In the backs of magazines, for instance, Popular Mechanics, Popular Science back in the day, and I realize I'm dating myself just admitting I've read magazines that are in paper, but you used to see ads for, it would say, you know, here's a device you can stick in your car, and it will cause your odometer to read half. In other words, it's a step-down gear. Is that right? Step down? Yeah, step down gear. So every 2 times the output shaft rolls, the odometer shaft rolls once. So if you're doing 30 miles an hour, it'll read 15. But if you drive 10 miles, it'll read 5. And you used to be able to buy those things. I mean, I've spoken to people who said, yeah, my dad bought one. He was a professional salesman, drove all over the Hell's Half Acre, and he bought one of those so that, at the end of the year, when he went to trade his car in, he could pull that little thing out, stick it back in, and go, yeah, I drove the car 25,000 miles. When in reality, he'd driven it 50. Okay? So it's illegal under federal statute to advertise for sale, sell, use, or install, or have installed a device that makes an odometer misread. That's number one, okay? But there's several other sections to the statute. Number two is it is illegal to disconnect, reset, alter, have disconnected, reset, or altered an odometer of a motor vehicle intending to change the mileage registered by the odometer. So in other words, you can't just disconnect it and drive. You can't reset the odometer. You can't have it disconnected. And what's funny is people say, why did it specify all this stuff? Well, if you think about this, if you had a car and somebody figured out that the odometer had been tampered with and somebody decides to sue you, you could say, oh, I didn't disconnect it. Someone else did. And it would turn out that you just took it to somebody and had them disconnect it, and it's your car, and as long as no one can figure out who disconnected it, they wouldn't be able to sue anybody. So it's illegal to have it disconnected by somebody else. And then number three, it's also against the law to, with intent to defraud, operate a motor vehicle on a street, road, or highway if the person knows that the odometer is disconnected or not operating. And when I taught law school at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law in downtown Detroit, I used to actually have this as one of my exam questions. And I would ask somebody, if you're driving along one day and your odometer broke, what are the ramifications of that? And one of the things that you could argue is the second it broke, you got to stop driving the car. Now, most people would say, well, Steve, come on. If you drove the car home, okay, and put a couple extra miles on it, that's probably not illegal. And yes, you're correct. Only because of the phrase with intent to defraud, okay? So your odometer breaks, you're driving home. You don't have to pull over and have the car flatbedded somewhere because you just say, I'm driving home for the purpose of driving home, not with the intent to defraud anybody. But if your odometer broke on your car and you drove it home and then drove it to work and then drove it around for a couple weeks and then put 30, 40, 50,000 miles on it, but they didn't register, that would be with intent to defraud. So that's illegal. And finally, you cannot conspire with other people to violate this section. So those things are illegal. They're absolutely illegal, okay? And if you're curious and going, Steve, federal statute says it's against the law. How illegal is it? Well, it's so illegal that, among other things, you can be sued by the federal government for a civil penalty if you get caught doing this. A person that violates this chapter is liable to the U.S. government for a civil penalty of not more than $10,000 for each violation. A separate violation occurs for each motor vehicle or device involved in the violation. The maximum penalty under the subsection for a related series of violations is $1 million. And every now and then, I used to subscribe to a whole bunch of different automotive trade journals. And I remember every now and then you'd actually see some dealership getting busted someplace for rolling odometers. And you'd often see this where they go, yeah, they found out this one dealership was doing it. They did an investigation, and they busted them for like 75 violations. And a bunch of people not only got hit for civil penalties, but they had to go to jail, prison. There's criminal penalties too. A person that knowingly and willfully violates this chapter or regulation shall be fined under Title 18, imprisoned for not more than 3 years or both. So someone can go to jail for this. And then, of course, it points out that the states can file a lawsuit. And then, of course, it says that individuals can file lawsuits. So it's a very bad thing, and it's outlawed and prohibited by federal law several different ways, meaning that if you rolled an odometer back with intent to defraud, okay, let's just make sure you got everything covered here, and you got caught, the federal government could sue you, the federal government could prosecute you, the state you're in could probably sue you, the state could probably prosecute you, and the person who bought the vehicle from you could also sue you and get their attorney fees and court costs paid by you, okay? So people would ask, Steve, why do people do this? Well, it turns out that enforcement is lax, as we say. But where the confusion comes from is there is a 10-year exemption on something. And I'll tell you what the 10-year exemption is. There is a subsection, and this is straight from the NHTSA website, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, N-H-T-S-A, okay? And NHTSA often releases things describing and outlining and explaining how the law works, much like I pointed out a few weeks ago about how the Federal Trade Commission oversees the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. And so on NHTSA's own website, it says vehicles 10 years old and older are exempt from the written disclosure requirements of the odometer statute. Okay? And what they're getting at is that under federal law and state law in most states, there's a bunch of written things you must do when you sell a car. We're all familiar with this. So when you go to sell a car, it's a used car, you're not a dealer, you're just a guy or a gal on the streets selling a car. And there's a thing on the title. It says how many miles are on this vehicle. And there's boxes, you fill the boxes in. Below that are 3 boxes, and it goes, this mileage is actual, this mileage is unknown. Sometimes it'll say this mileage is over 100,000 because in the old days, an odometer couldn't register the 1 on 100,000, go back to 90, or go back to zeros after 99. But nowadays they'll often say things like vehicle over 10 years exempt. Okay, it's over 10 years old, and Michigan state law allows that also. So I'm going to point out that many state laws have this. And so when they say that the vehicle is 10 years old or older is exempt from the written disclosure requirements, one of the things that attorneys will tell you is that when a statute's drafted, if it's drafted well and it's withstood court challenges, which this law has, it's been litigated quite a bit since it was passed, that every word has meaning. Okay, there are no extra words in there, and there are no missing words. If you can read a statute and it makes sense literally as you read it, then you just read it as written. And so what they're pointing out here is vehicles 10 years old and older are exempt from the written disclosure requirements. That's it. It doesn't say vehicles 10 years old or older can have their odometers rolled back, can have their odometers disconnected, can have cheat devices put in them. Doesn't say any of that. Doesn't say any of that. And in fact, if you go back and actually watch the video, which I'm not necessarily recommending you do, but the one that had the clickbait headline, they went and found the guy that they thought had rolled the odometer back, and they asked him, they said, well, dude, this odometer's been rolled back. He's a dealer. And he said, well, it's exempt. And in the article that accompanies the video, they point out, they go, the guy's wrong because it's exempt from the reporting requirement, the written requirement. But that doesn't mean you can roll the odometer back. And so, it's interesting because if you read this, I mentioned that the federal statute allows for civil actions. A person may bring a civil action to enforce a claim under this section, must be brought within 2 years. The court shall award costs and reasonable attorney fees to the person when a judgment is entered. And above that, it says a person that violates this chapter or regulation prescribed with intent to defraud is liable for 3 times the actual damages or $10,000, whichever is greater. So if you roll an odometer back, you're facing some severe penalties. And if you go into court and try to defend yourself and say, well, Your Honor, the car's over 10 years old, the judge is going to say, well, wait a second. Show me in the statute, the one that Mr. Lehto just had in his hands. I've heard that exact phrase in court, by the way. Let's take a look at that piece of paper Mr. Lehto's looking at, where it says specifically, a person may not disconnect, reset, alter, or have disconnected, reset, or altered an odometer of a motor vehicle intending to change the mileage registered by the odometer. Where does it say that is allowed on a 10-year-old vehicle? It doesn't. Nowhere does it say that. It does not say that. And I'll point out to you that I often tell people, I say, well, there's a state statute and a federal statute. In most states, there's a state statute. I'm not sure if all 50 states have got them. Michigan's got them. But Michigan's motor vehicle code on odometers is MCL 257-233A. And it spells out all of the odometer disclosure requirements at the time of the sale of a vehicle. So it says that when the owner of a registered motor vehicle transfers his or her title or interest, the transferor shall present to the transferee written disclosure of odometer mileage by means of a certificate, blah, blah, blah. And it says what it must be included, and then it says that it must include one of the following statements: that the mileage is actual, that the mileage is in excess of the design mechanical odometer limit. If the mileage is discrepancy, you can put that down too. And then somewhere on here, it says that there is an exemption, okay? And it says, the odometer information described in subsection 1, which is what I just told you, the disclosure statement that you sign on the title, acknowledging the accuracy or inaccuracy of the odometer, is not required, shall not be required for any of the following, and C is a vehicle is 10 years old or older. So it's simply saying that the information described in subsection 1 shall not be required for a vehicle 10 years old or older. But if you look at the rest of the statute, MCL 257-233A, and down at the bottom here, below that exemption. So in other words, if you want to think about this, and this is one way you can look at how you construe a statute. Number one, it says specifically that exemption only applies to subsection 1 above. But you keep reading, and there's more. But wait, there's more. Number 6, so this is well below 5, well below 1. Number 6, a person shall not alter, setback, or disconnect an odometer, cause or allow an odometer to be altered, setback, or disconnected, or advertise for sale, sell, use, install, or cause that device we were talking about from the back of Popular Mechanics. Okay? And that is an absolute prohibition. A person shall not do those things. Nowhere does it say, unless the car is 10 years old or older. Doesn't say that. That exemption does not apply to you physically altering or rolling back the odometer in the car. Does not cover that. And I've had people call me about an odometer case, and I've followed odometer cases. I still handle them. Although I'll tell you right now, every time I talk about odometers on the internet, I get 2 or 3 comments from somebody who says, "Oh, that doesn't happen anymore." Doesn't happen. It happens every day, my friends. So you should understand that number 7, and I'm talking about Michigan law here, says a person who violates subsection 6 is guilty of a felony. Okay, so not only are you not allowed to do it, it's a felony. And a felony means you can go to jail, where they make you make little rocks out of big rocks, okay? And so it is an actual crime, okay, to roll back an odometer in Michigan, as it is in also the feds as well. And then I would like to point out to you, and this is extremely important, that a dealership licensed in Michigan, if they violate subsection 1 or 6, now 1 is the one that says that there's an exemption for vehicles over 10 years on the reporting requirements, but subsection 6 simply says you cannot roll an odometer back. A violation of subsection 6 by any dealer licensed under this act is prima facie evidence of a fraudulent act. It's presumed you did it fraudulently if you're a dealer. And number 15 says a person who, with intent to defraud, violates any requirement under subsection 1 or 6, or a dealer who fails to retain for 5 years each odometer statement, is liable in an amount equal to 3 times the amount of actual damages sustained, or $1,500, whichever is greater. And in the case of a successful recovery of damages, the cost of the action together with reasonable attorney fees. So you can be sued for this, okay? So when someone says to you, hey, when you got a vehicle over 10 years old or older, if you want to, just simply roll the odometer back. There's an exemption that says you can do that. No, there's not. That's not what the exemption says. The exemption simply says that the little row of boxes on your title where it says, is this mileage accurate or is it not accurate? You can check the box that just says it's over 10 years old, okay? And that's basically a tip of the hat, as they say, to the notion that a vehicle over 10 years old, who knows? Okay, if you're not the original owner, how would you know? You don't know. So just you don't know. It's over 10 years old. Who cares? But that does not give you license to roll the odometer back, spin the odometer, what do you want to call it? Disconnect the odometer, reset the odometer. I've heard there's devices you can go in and change the data inside the digital box under the hood. That can all be done. And I'm here to tell you, if you do those things on a vehicle 10 years old or 10 years young or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a violation of the law. And by violation of the law, I'm telling you, it is both a crime federally and probably in your state. And it's also a civil action for which you can be sued by the federal government, most likely the state, and the person who bought your car. Okay? So do not believe that there's a federal law that allows you to do this, because no, federal law does not allow you to roll an odometer back on a vehicle just because it's 10 years old. Questions or comments, shoot my way, as well as any requests if you want to pick up a copy of the Lemon Law Bible. Everything a smart consumer needs to know about automobile law. $6, signed, sent to you, North America. Outside of North America, we'll work out a trade. Questions or comments, also shoot them to me as well. Lehto at Kennon.com, Lehto at Kennon, Kennon.com. I'm on Twitter, at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And this show's on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.